Well, I'm very excited today to have our author, Shawn Murphy, on, who wrote with Work Tribes. Shawn, before we get started, if you don't mind, give a little bit about your background in your consulting business.
Yeah. So I've been doing organizational behavior related, org development related consulting, really around large, whole scale transformation, whether it be technology implementations or acquisitions, or also just kind of culture related. Probably the biggest focus of the consulting work that I did was around in the government space and in healthcare. And so what we were brought in to do was oftentimes help, when something is broken, like bad blood between departments that need to work together, or, from an acquisition, helping employees integrate into a new business, a new culture. What we did is we designed, a whole scale change plan that integrated not just the people implications, but also the implications that the business would have on performance, also how technology would influence performance. So we really looked at changing an organization holistically rather than just very myopically focusing on people or process or technology. We looked at all three.
So why the name Work Tribes?
Yeah, well, to be honest, part of that is the publisher, right? So when you write a book, you don't get the luxury of saying this is what the book is going to be titled. I had input, but I like this because when you think about the concept of belonging, belonging often is affiliated with family or a group of people that you really identify with, and this concept of tribe really resonated with that experience of being a part of something that is meaningful.
So one of the things I thought was interesting in your book, you have a lot of interesting statistics. You said 70% of people don't like coming to work, and you had stats on how uncivil behavior can affect an organization. Did you write the book to turn those numbers around?
In part, when you do organizational consulting around change, oftentimes we run into, these kind of behaviors, uncivil behaviors, bullying, or just outright resistance. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's overt. And when back in my banking days, I was told by an executive, Shawn, you're such an idealist. And she was right. So fast forward 30 years, here I am, and I'm still an idealist. And I believe that work can be a positive experience. Unfortunately, that means addressing some of these negative behaviors, and as well as practices that are sometimes championed by the organization. I say that because one, I didn't write it just to kind of counter the uncivil behavior, but also to give people who do believe that work is something that can be meaningful, give them some really tangible tools to make that come to life.
Yeah, they also have to love what they do. I mean, aside from the company, they have to like what they do. You did a survey asking employees what they wanted besides a paycheck. What did you learn?
Well, this is something that has always been fascinating to me, because there's been a kind of a statistic that's been around for decades that managers say employees want better pay and employees say they want something else other than better pay. And obviously everybody wants better pay, right? I mean, we have to live, we have to feed our families and have a life that we can do things that we enjoy. But when I asked the question, I was surprised to learn more specifics around what people want more than or beyond a paycheck. And the top thing was meaningful work. And I think that's probably largely influenced by millennials. I don't think it's a new concept, but I think it really became important. More, or maybe discussed more as millennials said, you know what, hey, yeah, I want a good paycheck and I want to have a good life, but I also want to do something that is meaningful to maybe society or meaningful to me. But the other pieces all centered around either meaningful work or relationships. Relationships was the second most important thing that they wanted. We, aside from today, where a lot of us are sheltering in place and working from home, we spend most of our time with our colleagues. In fact, some say it's a third of our day is where we're working alongside people that aren't our family or friends. So when we spend that much time working and we work closely with people, if we're great high performers, kicking butt during the day, we need to be working alongside people that we like, that we appreciate, or at least we say, hey, you know what? I can come into work, do great things. We work well together. We may not be buddies, but as long as the relationships are solid, that was the second most important thing that people said they want beyond a paycheck.
I believe likability is important. When I would run different organizations, I'd have all the employees interview people. And no matter how talented they were, if they weren't comfortable with those people, they didn't feel like they could live with them on a day-to-day basis, because you end up seeing the people you work with more than you see your family.
Right, exactly. To that point, the other thing that came up was, I just want to be useful. And I thought that was an interesting insight because, when you think about going to work, I think some of us assume that, well, I got the job. Obviously, I was suitable for that role. But the idea that people want to be useful, I thought was an interesting insight in that just because we have a job and if you're leading people doesn't mean that your team feels useful. You might be giving them things to do, right? Projects and assignments, but that doesn't mean they're being useful. They could just be, you know, uh, retired in place, if you will, right? I show up, I do what I need to do, and I leave. But to be useful implies that you have to know what my strengths are, what my goals are, as my boss, and I have to be able to tell you that too.
It's funny, I one time came in second for a position and to be head of new ventures of this large organization. And I met the guy and befriended the guy who actually got the position. And he was getting 250,000 a year and $75,000 bonus. And he said it was the worst experience of his life because he never felt useful. Like all he did was attend meetings. And he said, I just got to get out of here even for less money because I feel like I'm dying. So, a lot of that plays into it, right? That's where money doesn't really matter if you don't feel like you're accomplishing anything.
Money is a short-term motivator, right? If you think about, get 75,000 signing bonus, well, that money at some point, the excitement of it, it doesn't stay long in our brains. Or our memories, right? We just adjust our lifestyle and we move along. And if we have horrible relationships but we're paid really well, at some point, those horrible relationships, and I can't even begin to tell you the number of consulting gigs I had where a big chunk of the work was around really fractured relationships, either with executives or between team members.
Yeah, I remember years ago where the head of R&D at Galaxo didn't get along with the head of sales. They literally divided the building physically in half and drew a line down the middle of the building until the chairman and the board stepped in and said, this is crazy. We
Yeah.
need everybody to be working on the same page. How does an organization create a sense of belonging? You talk about that in the book.
Yeah, so that's really the gist of the book is if you want to create the sense of belonging, and obviously I'm going to say you should, organizationally speaking, there's actually two answers to your question, Mark. One is organizationally speaking, the company needs to invest in their leaders' development. Companies need to really look at how are they encouraging performance, not just individual performance, right? So if we look at performance management, traditionally speaking, companies say, okay, I'm going to evaluate your performance on an annual basis, and then we'll give you some modest increase, and then you go about your way until next year. If you want belonging, you can't reinforce individual performance. You also have to reinforce team performance. So the performance management system also needs to look at team goals, team recognition, as well as team bonuses, if you will. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bonus, but there's some kind of compensation as a result of the team performing really well. So that's at the organizational level. But with belonging, where it really truly comes into play or becomes a reality is the in the trenches leaders working closely with their teams. That's where the belonging is really going to come and take hold.
How do individuals help new people feel welcome? Because I think that's always the thing. That's why I used to have people interview with everybody in the organization so they didn't feel like they had to resell themselves when they came in and people
Yeah.
got a chance to know them. So for those, and many organizations don't run like that. Somebody in HR or the boss interviews them, they get hired, and now everybody has to get used to this person. What's the best way for a person, for people to welcome a new person into the organization, and for that new person to not have to show too much and push too hard to be accepted?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a couple of things on this. One, in these days when most of us are working remotely or there's some kind of hybrid work arrangement, that the answer to that question takes on a different meaning, right? So we'll say for those who are maybe working back in the office, there are a couple of ways to help that employees can help new team members feel welcome. One is, and this sounds so simple, but it's missed so often. When the person comes into the office, have someone greet that person, right? They don't know what the heck where to go, right? It's overwhelming. So if it's an individual contributor, make sure that somebody's there to welcome them. Make sure their desk is set up, their cube, or wherever they're working. Those are simple things, but they signal a lot that, hey, we prepared in advance for you coming to join the team. I think the other pieces is, I think, making sure that that person has kind of a mentor or we'll say buddy that spends some time helping them acclimate to the organization. One of my favorite companies, it's a software development company in Ann Arbor called Menlo Innovations. One of the things that they do is everybody works in pairs every single day, and they rotate those pairs. And what's good about that is it's reinforcing a lot of different things. But if you take that idea of, okay, well, you're always working in pairs, have that concept apply to helping new people join the organization. Now, it's a little more difficult when we're working virtually, but you could find virtual solutions to the physical approaches that you would normally take if people were in the office.
I don't think this virtual is going to last forever. And I think, and I want to get your comments on this. I think a lot of people, my sister's head of HR, and she's been working at home and she really doesn't like it. And when I talk to other people who've been working at home for a long time, now I've been working at home even when I ran organizations for most of my whole career, and I like it. But a lot of people feel disconnected from people. So how long do you think this whole concept is going to last, and where are we going to fall out here?
Well, I agree with you that the way where we have a predominant number of employees working remotely, that's going to change. When, don't know for sure. I saw some stats, and I think it was from Deloitte or McKinsey, I could be mistaken, that only 8% of the executives that were surveyed said that they would remain 100% remote first. I think where we're going to land is more of a hybrid model where there are going to be more options available to employees, even those who work in the HQ area, the headquarters area, because the genie's out of the bottle, right? You can't put it back in. There are employees who really like the improvement of their lifestyle by not having to drive into work. I live in San Francisco. My office is 20 minutes away. On a typical day, it's an hour and 20 minutes to get there, one way. So think about, I've gained over 3 hours of my day in terms of productivity, and that's a hard thing to give up, right? So I think what we're finding is, or what we're learning is that one, there's going to be this emergence of head of remote work that's really going to help companies mature their remote practices and really make it where there's more a more kind of mature, I was going to say professional, mature business practice around helping people who are going to remain remote, have the right technology, the right Wi-Fi, have the right setup of their home office. So I think we're going to find that it's going to be more of a hybrid versus 100% or not.
I have to say, back in 1996, I ran a company, and a lot of the employees said, I'd like to work from home. And the founder was totally against it. And I said, well, let's give it a try. This is 1996. And I found that productivity went up 30%. And I was saying to the owner, I said, you know what? People are giving you more hours and not asking for any more money.
Yeah.
And so that was a super benefit to him. But I wonder about the psychological side for a lot of people that they just can't handle the isolation.
Well, we definitely have seen an increase in mental health uh, concerns, whether it be loneliness, isolation, depression, uh, and you know, I've been working remotely for, gosh, probably a couple decades now. It's not my favorite. I like to be around people, but I've learned to adapt. I'll be honest, when COVID happened, I probably went through, gosh, probably a couple months where I was just blue for no reason. It would just come out of just randomly occur. So it is definitely a concern that companies are going to have to invest in to help employees manage their mental well-being. You know, the other side to this, though, is you mentioned the productivity, and productivity has increased, and that's, you know, with the company where I work, Bluescape, we did this survey of management and employees, and both groups said, yes, I'm more productive. However, I'm also feeling lonely. I'm working longer hours. And there's a productivity cliff that's coming, right? I could work a lot. I can work 10 hours a day. But if I'm starting to feel lonely, isolated, feeling blue, depressed, it's going to influence that productivity. And companies need to get ahead of it now, because it will be difficult for them, you know, as long as this continues to go on for at least maybe another year.
So a lot of companies might have full-time psychologists
Yep.
as part of their team going forward. Do you see any interesting collaboration tools being developed which can complement the Zoom environment today?
Well, I'll always say the software that my company makes is a what we call a virtual work platform, which basically says, you know, when you work, like right now, right, we're in a Zoom meeting. Imagine this meeting being plopped into another virtual workplace. It's all in the cloud. You can meet, and we can be interacting with content within this workspace. We can upload content, we can annotate on videos, we can annotate on documents while we're in the same meeting. So I think bringing all of these different tools that we're using virtually, Google Docs, Dropbox, whatever it happens to be, Zoom, WebEx, and putting it in one place, that's really where I think that's the next wave. And we have a few competitors, but obviously I think we do it best.
And give them the name of the company again.
Bluescape.
Okay, all right. And maybe you'll put in the chat box where they can go find that so they can test it out themselves.
Yeah, well, it's an enterprise solution. So we don't sell individual licenses. It's really more enterprise-wide.
For large organizations, of course. How can new people help themselves fit in? We didn't finish the answer for that one.
Yeah, so you know, here's an important distinction. Fitting in versus belonging, they're not the same thing. And this isn't from my work. This is from the work that Brene Brown has done. So fitting in means I need to give up a part of I need to hide or cover a part of myself, whether it be my skills, whether it be, you know, maybe I'm a divorced parent, whatever it happens to be, I suppress something for the good of the team, right? We don't want that, right? We want people to bring themselves to work, right? So that starts to get into diversity, equity, inclusion topics. Belonging says, you know what, Mark? Whatever your background is, whatever your beliefs are, belonging allows for us to have conversations, acknowledge our differences, that doesn't exclude people from being a part of the team, right? We don't want people to fit in. We want people to feel like they belong.
And so when somebody new joins, what can they do to make that happen?
Yeah, thank you for bringing the question back. Yeah, so I think it's making sure that each team member has time with that new person, that they get to know each other, that they don't just get caught up in the meeting minutia, that they are actually making like if you're the new person and we're all your team, this whole team that's here there should be time spent on your calendar getting to know you, right? Taking you to meetings, helping you understand the business lingo. Obviously, the other things like going to lunch and, like I said earlier, making sure your desk is set up. All those things are important. But really, I think when we talk about belonging, a big part of it is about performance. And so when new team members join, we have to make sure we're spending the time with you to help you perform quickly. So like I said, making sure you understand the lingo that's said in the business, making sure you understand kind of the layout of the team and the customers that we support or the departments that we interact with, really making sure people have the opportunity to kind of understand how things get done around here.
Are there industries that are more welcoming than others, and should people be aware of that when they're running those kinds of businesses, you know, whether it be pharmaceutical or investment banking or software development? Because I think all of those different skill sets for different types of industries make for different types of people.
True. You know, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Here's what I would say though, Mark. Belonging is a human experience, right? Working is a human experience. Obviously, culture shapes very much how we experience our work, right? I would say that belonging could be experienced in any industry. It might be more difficult in some of those that are maybe more traditional in the way that they approach their relationship with employees. But I would say it can happen anywhere, and it should, because it's a human experience. And frankly, it's a human need. We all want it. We all need it. But it's up to that company's culture to do the things to help it become.
But I think maybe in investment banking, you're working as a team. There might be 5 of you working as a team. So you have that collegiality. But if you're a software developer, you're just sitting in front of a computer pumping out code, it might be different.
Maybe. I mean, so LinkedIn was one of the companies that we studied for work tribes. LinkedIn is a software company, right? They've got engineers coding the back end of LinkedIn. And
yeah,
LinkedIn has a diversity, inclusion, and belonging team. So when I interviewed their global head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, they have a very mature set of business practices around belonging. So I think it goes to, you know, there's an old saying that culture is a shadow of the CEO. So really, you know, I think the CEO sets the tone, doesn't necessarily fully say belonging is here or not, but the CEO really can set the tone to make it happen, allow it to happen, or it to not.
Are there different strategies based on gender, age, and position? And gender means so many different things today than it meant when you and I probably started being in business. So, and especially with the Me Too movement and all the things that we've seen socially, are there different strategies based on all these different things?
Well, you know, ideally I'd say no, right? But I think the fact is, there's a kind of an awakening that's happening right now to, you know, Black Lives Matter and how, you know, I'll just make this about my own experience. I don't want to speculate across the board, but, you know, I'm white and I'm a male, right? So I theoretically, historically, have had more privilege over, say, a Black man, right, who might be my peer. And so belonging probably doesn't happen as easily for a Black person as it does, say, for me, because there's institutional, you know, biases there. So I think what we have to be careful about is to tailor how we go about creating belonging based on race, because then we start to introduce a lot of bias, as well as it just becomes so unwieldy. You got to remember, belonging is something we all want, right? It doesn't matter your age, your race, your socioeconomic status. We all want to feel like we are valued, wanted, and welcomed. That being said, I would be naive to say companies need to look at belonging and evaluate, does that happen equitably across the organization?
Well, would you have different strategies? Because, when you bring somebody older, one time brought in a guy, I was 30 and I was the CEO, and he was 54, 57. And I kind of felt like the strategy of inclusion with him was going to be different than if I brought somebody else in my age. So is there thoughts or how you talk to your clients about the thinking around age and even position? When somebody becomes your boss, they bring in a manager. That's a different set of circumstances, and the relationship is different than bringing another colleague. So
Yeah.
how do you make those people fit in, and do you have to think about specific strategy based on age and position?
I think, no, I don't think so. I think you do need to have a very clear how we create the sense of belonging, right? You're going to be championing it. So I could actually, I guess I would say, if it's at the individual level, the middle of the organization, yeah, you're going to spend more time helping people feel acclimated because they're the ones that are impacted by what upper management is doing. I think you would definitely want to have more of a kind of a, if you are a senior leader in an organization, here are our expectations around creating a sense of belonging, right? We're going to acclimate you to how we do this here in the organization, whether that be through onboarding, whether that be through hiring, whether that be through performance management. So I think, yes, there would be some different tactics based on the level, but ultimately the goal is everyone contributes to it and experiences the sense of belonging.
So in the book, you write about diversity, but you're not talking about the kind of diversity that mostly we're hearing in the news today. So what are you talking about when you talk about diversity in an organization?
Yeah, so diversity is definitely race, gender, sexual orientation. But the other piece that I write about is cognitive diversity, right? So when we think about different ways of thinking, you take an engineer, say, and versus an HR business partner who is dealing with human needs and interactions, they think differently, right? So when you have teams, you want you want people to think cognitively different. I'm not saying that very clearly. You want people to think differently, right? You don't want all of the same type of thinkers on a team. And there's some definite great research that Harvard Business Review has put out around the different types of thinkers. But that's definitely an important element to a team's performance, is having diverse sets of problem solvers, if you will, based on how they think and approach problems and projects.
You mentioned here, what's your take on Warren Buffett's hire well, manage little? What does he mean by that?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Warren Buffett and his leadership and management beliefs. Hire well, manage little really says you need to take your time when you're hiring someone, right? You want to make sure, like when I was hired for Bluescape, I had 12 interviews and probably 30 hours total. That's an example. You just really want to make sure this person is a fit for what the company is needing to accomplish strategically. And once you can vet that person as best as you possibly can, you should feel so good about, yes, this is the right person with the right skill sets, with the right mindset, that I don't have to worry about managing Shawn on a day-to-day basis. We hire him, we vetted him thoroughly, go, right? Go do what we asked you to, what we hired you to do.
But what percentage of people who are hired going through all that process and it still doesn't work out, during that 60-day probation period? Do you know what that is, and why, after all that work put in, it still doesn't? And I think that happens with every field. You see in sports, people get drafted in the first, second round in football, and they wash out. You see CEOs, so many companies, major Fortune 500s who have switched CEOs 3-4 times in 1 year. I mean, that's barely enough time for them to find the parking lot.
Right. Yeah. You know, I think there's an interesting, you know, when you hire people, not everybody knows how to interview, right? There could be so many biases in the way the questions are asked when asking the person that make it sound like the person is the best thing since sliced bread, right? So I don't know what the numbers are in terms of hires versus their, you know, their fit in the end. But really what we're talking about is poor, they don't, the company doesn't have a good hiring set of practices. They're not equipping the workforce to know how to interview well. They don't know how to, you know, ask questions that don't lead a person to give the best answer, or they ask questions that are biased. So really it boils down to their hiring practices and whether or not they've got a mature one, and is the workforce ready? Or does the workforce know how to actually interview?
What are questions that, I'm not worried about the legality of this, but are
As the
questions that,
lawyer.
yeah. And why I'm saying this is there are questions that you might ask that are going to give you the answer you wanted anyway. What kinds of questions should you avoid asking that are almost self-fulfilling prophecies of, you know, making not the right choice here?
Yeah, so the big picture answer is you want to ask behavior-based questions, right? So, you know, not, you don't want to say, you know, have you ever had to deal with a colleague you didn't like? Sure, yeah, I have. Rather than asking a question like that, you ask a behavior-based question. Tell me a time how you overcame a conflict with a colleague, right? You want to evaluate their thinking. You want to understand
Yes.
how they think about what it is you're asking them.
Can you have a successful culture without financial success, or conversely, can you have financial successes succeed for the long term in a negative atmosphere?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is kind of sad. I mean, I can tell you one of the consulting engagements that I had, the team was being basically dominated by a narcissistic bully. The team produced, right? They weren't doing great, but they were doing well enough for the organization to say, yeah. So that's just one little microcosm. Expand that out across the organization. There are plenty of dysfunctional companies out there that are profitable.
Yeah. Even
So,
dysfunctional countries that are succeeding no matter what.
right.
Until the internet's arrivals, few companies expected employees to work a minimum of 50 hours a week, and providing employees with work-life balance possible with global competition. Is that possible? I mean, I think, you know, when I talk to my daughter and her generation, my daughter is going to be turning 30, and I believe she's listening in today. I think that's the biggest thing, because they see their parents having, you know, especially I'm an entrepreneur working, you know, 10 hours a day would be a vacation, you know,
Right.
20 hours a day or more, 6 days a week. I don't think that's the life that they want.
And nor should they, right? I think, so first of all, startup is definitely different than, say, an enterprise. Because in a startup, you're hustling to, to get the product out, right? You're hustling to mature the product. Maybe you're wanting to be acquired, or maybe an IPO, whatever it happens to be. The reality is this: when we work 10 plus hours a day, 80 hours a week, whatever that number is, there is an effect on our well-being, right? There's also, it also influences our ability to sleep, which influences our ability to think, which influences the effectiveness of our work. So this mindset that has come from, you know, previous generations that, you know, work long, you know, you'll be rewarded. Well, that went out the door probably 2 decades ago, right? However, there's still this rugged, you know, I'm just going to work really hard, because that's kind of what we think of. That's how we think about it here in America. But the reality is, just because you're working longer hours doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be as effective. There's a term, I can't remember the exact name, but it's like work fatigue, meaning when you leave the office, do you have an opportunity to decompress from the day? With our phones and our laptops, we can easily just be pulled into work by a ding, right? Notification, and we're working. We need to be able to have the time to decompress, spend time with our family, spend time with our friends, spend time alone. I mean, if we don't get that, I just recently wrote an article for an HR blog that there's this productivity cliff. I think I mentioned this earlier. We are working so long, and it's starting to affect our well-being, that there are adverse effects that are already happening for people. And companies executives really need to take on, how do we signal to the organization that, yeah, working long hours, yes, it's going to happen, right? But it doesn't need to be every day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, whatever it happens to be. Now it's more difficult when you're an entrepreneur or a startup, because this time you don't have much of it, and in terms of trying to get the business off the ground.
But I think it's interesting. I read a venture capitalist, an old school venture capitalist, said that he was surprised when he was interviewing different young entrepreneurs, let's say under the age of 35, that said to him, if you're expecting to call me on Saturday and Sunday, don't bother, because I'm not doing that. And my people aren't doing that. And I think there's been this big revolt and big pushback saying, I expect to have my Saturday and Sundays to myself. I'm not going to be doing this thing where I'm working 7 days a week. And my relationship to my significant other, my kids, is really important. How are companies dealing with that now? Because I think the old school guys are really surprised and thinking the younger people are soft, but maybe they're smarter.
Well, so I've actually been interviewing executives over the past, this is September, since July. And my whole focus was, how are they guiding their organization through COVID? And inevitably, the conversation turns to well-being. Our CEO at Bluescape, so we just had Labor Day here in America. He gave everybody Friday before Labor Day weekend, that day off as a wellness day, saying, don't check your emails, don't respond to notifications. If you have to, do it, but quickly do so that you can enjoy that time off. The CEO, he's the former CEO now of Quest Nutrition. He's moved on to a different company. When they were starting to hear complaints from the workforce around just working long hours and people, parents feeling stressed out because they're homeschooling and at the same time trying to work, and they're just feeling the overwhelming burden of that, they also started giving people days off, or making sure that they stop sending emails after 6 o'clock. Those are hard to do, but when the CEO says, this is what we're going to do, then it becomes more of a practical solution rather than an idealistic, that'd be nice, but that's never going to happen.
I used to have family first. So I used to tell my employees, if your kids are playing ball, I expect you to be at the game. Get it done. You know what you got to do, but don't miss the opportunity, because it never comes back. How large do you think the tribe word applies to? Does it scale? And if so, what are the techniques to apply that at scale?
Mark, this is such a good question, because my research partner and we struggled with this question. So when we did all the data, we did all the interviews, did all of the analysis of it, Bruce is his name. Bruce said, Shawn, does this scale? How does this spread? And the answer wasn't super clear, because what we're talking about is the biggest influence on belonging is at the team level is the team's immediate boss. In fact, 70% of the experience of work is based on the boss, right? And that probably isn't a surprise, because we hear people say, well, people leave the boss, not the organization, right? So to scale it, what companies really need to do is invest in the foundational skills of their leaders. And by foundational skills, that's my word for the soft skills. Those skills like empathy and giving effective feedback that can be constructive. Those are all pieces that are inputs to this experience of belonging. Belonging isn't something that the boss creates. Belonging is something the boss influences. And so if you want to scale it, companies really need to be very strategic in how they hire their leaders and how they develop their leaders. And the development of their leaders is always ongoing. Because frankly, as we move to a more collaborative work arrangement, which has been happening over the past 2 decades, people are working closer together on projects more than ever before. And those dynamics, those interactions are all fueled by our ability to relate, to communicate. So it's really in the leadership ranks is where that is going to scale. And it doesn't take a lot of money to do that.
Give some examples.
Well, you think about, so when we think about culture, there's all of these investments that are around, we're going to create a beer tap area. I went to one company.
The gimmicks.
Huh?
The gimmicks.
The gimmicks, yeah. So companies invest in all those gimmicks, but that doesn't really create belonging. It doesn't really shape the culture the way that you think it would, right? So those kind of investments, well, I think they add a little bit, really, but they cost a lot, right? You got to maintain that. You've got to, in some cases, you've got to redo part of your office space to accommodate a cereal bar or beer taps, whatever it happens to be, a place for the foosball or whatever. But investing in leadership development, yes, it's an investment, but it's not a huge investment.
One of the people writes here, I've seen studies and personally believe that at a point, working long hours becomes counterproductive. Many people spend time at work because it's expected, not because it's more productive. Agree or disagree?
I agree, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, I think people want to be just seen.
Well, I think also in this day and age where we're all working remotely, I wrote an article recently on feeling guilty working remotely. It's like some people, and they typically tend to be high performers, are worried that I don't want my boss to think that I'm slacking off. So I'm going to be online and I'm going to be, really working long hours. I'm going to get my stuff in early. And that guilt propels this unhealthy behaviors that ultimately just kind of create more anxiety, feeling overwhelmed. It's a slippery slope. I mean, there's a reason why Arianna Huffington, arguably one of the most successful businesswomen here in recent America, she wrote a book on sleep because she was working these long hours and she physically collapsed. That's what we all face.
In the book, you write about human chemistry and how much does that impact a successful work environment?
Yeah, so human chemistry it's not just a metaphor, but oxytocin is released when we interact with people that we enjoy working with. And that helps create that chemistry of us being able to work together. And it's hard to really use that as a tangible business practice, but we want to make sure that when we're hiring people, we're doing it in a way that allows for that chemistry to benefit the team.
What do you think of these open work environments that are now passe, but SEI in the Philadelphia area was the first, and they were featured in the nightly news. I'm not an advocate of this because I was a journalist, and newsrooms were always open. There was no just desk after desk after desk, and I think in the financial field, trading desks were also open. And I found that you were less productive because not only the noise, but the interruptions, you just couldn't focus on things. So what do you think, looking back now, are those open environments successful, or now people going back because of COVID to everybody's going to have their own office and not just cubicle, but things that are going to be closed in. So what's your take on that?
I think it's a hybrid. I think the smarter organizations who've been playing with this recognize that you need different spaces for the different types of work that people do. So, you could have an open work environment. However, if people need to do some deep thinking, some deep work, you need to have, spaces to where people can do that, where they're uninterrupted, right? So the physical office layout really is, an important component to helping people be productive, helping people, different types of thinkers, think in environments that work for them. I have ADD, so working in an open environment, I have to put on headphones to
Right.
drown out, the distractions. Even though I like people around me, I don't necessarily want them talking to me. I just like the energy of people moving around. So I think the smarter organizations are saying we need to create different spaces for different types of work.
What habits do good leaders and organizations exhibit that make people want to work even harder?
They're relatable, bottom line. You said earlier, Mark, family first, right?
Right, always.
And I get the sense that you truly believe that. And
yeah.
when you're working with your team, you enforce that, you reinforce that, right? Great leaders will also have hard conversations. Like if I'm reporting to you, Mark, and you're seeing me work long hours, but you're also starting to see my work quality, kind of, go down. Great leaders will say, hey, Shawn, let's talk, right? And you're not making me feel bad, but you're saying, hey, I'm worried. I'm seeing you work long hours and you typically do really great work, but right now I'm not seeing that. So what's going on, right? It's be curious, not critical. I think great leaders are relatable. They want to connect with their employees and help them be successful. And that means sometimes saying, I'm out, something's off.
I actually started in one of the organizations I ran. I said, I gave them 4 weeks vacation. Like people on the board thought I was nuts. But I said, I want you to take a week off a quarter. And some people said, I can't take a week. I said, I want you to take a week off a quarter so you can recharge your batteries so you will be running at optimum all year round. Yeah. If you take a week off, and I want you to take the week off with no laptop, no access whatsoever, because otherwise it defeats the purpose.
Totally. When I wrote my first book, The Optimistic Workplace, one of the companies I featured was Bamboo HR, which at the time was a HR tech startup company. I think they've since moved out of the startup phase, but they had an anti-workaholic policy, which went like this: if you continually work more than 40 hours a week, that is grounds for termination. Because their belief was, if you can't get your work done in 40 hours, we're not doing something to support you, and there's something you're not doing to help yourself. So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to help you work through this, because 40 hours is more than enough time for you to do what we hired you to do. And if you aren't doing it, well, then you now not only jeopardize your performance, but your team's performance. See,
I think a theory that makes perfect sense. I mean, for some people like myself, I always feel like there's one more thing that I could be doing. And so, but if the organization understands that, they can make a little bit of leeway for people, but overall, it's better for the organization if you do take your vacation and you do take time for yourself, and that you spend time with your family. Balance is everything, right? Everything in moderation, including work. It seems the diverse team, different personality types, backgrounds, and the good chemistry comments are counter to each other. How do you deal with that?
Ask me that question again.
It seems a diverse team, different personality types, backgrounds, and the good chemistry comments are counter to each other. How do you deal with that?
So are you talking about kind of conflict that happens from those differences?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, frankly, I hope that happens, right? Because, being human is messy. And Mark, I'm going to do something that's going to just it's going to irritate you, right? So we need to have those, we need to expect that there's going to be conflict. However, where we need to focus is helping the team and the team members know how to handle those conflicts. If there isn't a conflict, frankly, when my team, if everybody's getting along and everybody's agreeing and I'm like, okay, something's off here, because we need to have differences. I want my team members to be outspoken, but they need to be outspoken in a professional, constructive way, right? Not a critical way where they're attacking the person. No tolerance for that, right? That creates toxic interactions and culture. But I want open disagreement. I want open debate, but there better be an outcome. Just to debate because we're debating, no, that's not healthy. So we have to really basically coach people on how to, it's okay to have differences. Like I don't always agree with my CEO. I don't always agree with my boss. And that's okay, right? Because I know how to do that in a constructive way. And sometimes they're going to slap me, put me in my place, and I'm okay, got it. But we have to foster this willingness to disagree. If we don't, we basically create a country club effect, right? Hey, I love coming here. It's great. Everybody gets along. But really,
It's funny you should say that, because I once fired a person for not disagreeing. And
really?
the only reason I did that is because I said, we had a train wreck. And I said, and they knew that this train wreck was happening, because they said after, oh, I thought that wasn't going to work. I said, all right, you're fired. Why? Because you didn't tell us, because you saw the train wreck coming. I said, how many different times do you have to ask that? And I think you see that a lot also when you're teaching at universities and you tell the students, tell me if there's something I'm not giving you. And I see that, happen everywhere. And you keep asking and asking, and then at the end of the day, you get a few people who are unhappy. You wonder, oh my God, I gave you every opportunity. But I think at the end of the day, the boss has to work really hard for people to trust them in order to take that step forward, to give that, don't you think?
Yeah, high-performing teams have no tolerance for BS. They have no tolerance for team members who aren't willing to step aside and say, wait, time out. There's something not right here, right? Because we're moving so fast, because we're assuming that everybody is doing their part, that moment when somebody isn't, that's, to your point, that's when the train wreck starts to happen, right? So we need to be having these difficult conversations. We need to be comfortable to say, yeah, I can do this. The CEO, Rich Sheridan for Menlo Innovations, what he tells me, says, Shawn, one of my most important responsibilities is to pump out fear in the culture. I don't want people to be afraid to come to me and say, hey, Rich, I don't understand this, or I think there might be a better way to approach this. Can we talk about it, right? When we're fearful because something happened where maybe you told me I should speak up and I spoke up and there was some retaliation, right? So the leaders need to be very mindful about what we say, and is there evidence and proof that that's happening?
That's right. You live it. I mean, look at Ray Dalio, who wrote the book Principles, and he runs what's the big private equity firm, and he's already been through 6 CEOs since he stepped back, and now he's back again as CEO. And he talks about this culture of honesty, but I'm not so sure that they're living it, because they have 2 women who don't think they're being paid, one who's the former CEO suing them. So even though they've had this great performance, maybe they live it 80% of the time, but there's a chunk of it they're clearly not living it.
Yeah. Well, and that starts getting into what I think is such an important conversation, which is around equity and pay for women versus men, right? I mean, it makes no sense that there would be inequities, right? And companies who've been getting away with it, maybe because they haven't been focusing on it, now there's a spotlight on it, and it's like, oh, we've got a problem here. And that's,
I wonder if that's generational too, because I think that people, let's say under 60 today, that women have to get paid the same, because it's not like you can say a man should get paid more because he's the sole breadwinner, which is what always was the excuse before. But if a woman's doing the same job, same title, same everything, I can't see how. I never can believe it when you hear it. What do you think of leaders who play employees off against each other and do they succeed? Because I've known CEOs who like to do that. What do you think about that? Is that short-term success? What do you think of that for organizations to succeed for the long term?
I don't think that, I mean, the company could succeed. I think it just creates a toxic culture, right? You know, it's cruel to play employees off of one another. I mean, you're playing games, and I'm sorry, uh, if you're running a business, you've got a lot on your mind to create games that cause people to, you know, underperform. That's just stupid.
I think the best performers and smartest people leave those organizations, and you're
Absolutely.
left with people who just can't get a job anywhere else.
Yep.
Before you know it, you're heading
100% agree.
south.
100% agree.
What type of competition then is healthy for an organization?
Yeah, so I think the right kind of competition is not focused on individuals, but outcomes. So if we are saying, all right, you know, we need to be able to come up with the next best, you know, you take hackathons, for example, right? That's a competition. That's a healthy competition for the most part. It's to see who can come up with the best solution for problems that are in a software, in the software. The key to focus on is don't make it personal, right? I'm not going to make the competition about you and me or this team and that team, but it's about the outcome that we're trying to accomplish. And that competition needs to reinforce teamwork. It's not about the rugged individual who's going to come in and save the day, but it's about how that team works together to get to that best outcome.
Two more questions for you. With so many organizations having their employees work from home, you talk about this in your book. How does an organization monitor this without employees feeling like adolescents?
I think you said it earlier, it's trust, right? I think, you know, unfortunately, there are companies who employ or deploy spying software to
Right.
see how much screen time has Shawn put in today. If that's going to happen, you're going to your point just a moment ago, Mark, you're not going to get the best talent because they're not going to tolerate that, right? There's no outcome from that that's good. It destroys trust.
So my last question to you is, what CEOs have you interviewed or observed that you're really impressed with and they've built long-term success? And I think it could be different ways, because if you look in sports, Bill Belichick is kind of a cold individual, but he's built this amazing track record of success. And I'm forgetting the manager of the Atlanta Braves, who won 18 straight division titles, but was a very upbeat personality that people just like being around and so forth. So in the business world, what have you observed?
So one of my favorite CEOs is Bob Chapman from Barry Waymiller. So Barry Waymiller is a global manufacturing organization, privately owned. What I love about what Bob does, and I've interviewed Bob, I can't even begin to tell you how many different times, had lots of delightful conversations with the man. He takes to heart that every employee that works for Barry Waymiller, it is his responsibility to make sure that they have what they need to be successful. So that could be, you know, and that sounds very generic and probably not giving him the best due credit, but he believes that leaders are responsible for the health and wellness and success of their employees. And he's designed an organization around that very philosophy. He has what he calls truly human leadership. That's what his approach is. So you're looking at the person, not the employee, right? Like, you know, you have a life outside of coming to work here, and we're going to make sure that you can enjoy that life as well as come here and do great work. I'm drawing a blank on his last name. Ari from Zingerman's, which is again in Ann Arbor, has built an amazing organization around, you know, food. And one of the things that they do is they practice open book financing. Right? Every employee learns the financing. how the company is doing financially and how their team contributes to that, right? So there's these themes of ownership, right? Like I'm now seeing what happens with this work that I'm doing and the output of that. And I think that helps people feel like you trust me. You're treating me like an adult, not as, somebody who is unaware of things beyond what my scope of work is.
Well, by the way, it was Bobby Cox, the manager of the Braves, that I was referring to. I want to thank you so much. I hope people will take the time to read your book, Work Tribes, again, for everybody to see the book. I wish you continued success, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks, Mark, for having me on here. I enjoyed it.
Have a great rest of your day. Everybody have a safe rest of your day. Take care.